Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's upcoming trip to Maui. I'm a little jealous during Feast Week. Before we begin, a big shout out to all of you who support the show through one-time gifts or on a recurring basis, like our Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level, Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, and Mike Huntoon, Draymond Green supporters, Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, Doug Robinson, Daniel Dranak, and all the Scott Scow supporters too on Patreon, as well as Rich Wagenheim and Kenneth Kremet on Substack. If you want to support the show, and you can please head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to get the links. You guys really are the best, and you help us do all kinds of cool things. So only about 2 weeks ago, also, to get your entry into the Beat Rod Challenge, predicting the final order of the Big Ten, 1 through 18. Send along your predictions to me at Eric, ERIC, at tffinots.com. And it's a pretty stacked field this year in Maui. In the first round of the Invitational for the Spartans will be against the Colorado Buffaloes of the Big 12 Conference. They'll then play the next day against the winner of either UConn or Memphis, or I should say, against one of the two teams. We're not sure which side of the bracket will be. But before we talk about Colorado, just briefly, a very brief injury update on Jace Richardson, who sprained his ankle at the end of the Samford game on Tuesday night. I guess basically he's fine. He'll be ready to go on Monday. He's practiced some today. He's held out of practice a little bit, but Izzo and everybody thinks he's going to be good to go. And so it should be a non-issue. I guess I don't think there's much more to say about that, except that we're glad he's going to be okay. So like I said, they're going to play Colorado. It's a 5 o'clock game start, Eastern. And, just to give you an idea, the field is really tough. I mean, we've got number 2 Auburn, 5th ranked UConn, 7th Iowa State, 13th UNC, 37th ranked Memphis, 39th Dayton, 45th MSU, and 72nd Colorado. So no Chaminade this year. And so Colorado's the easiest draw, although, I guess you could argue Michigan State's the second easiest. Colorado's one of those schools that's not known for their basketball, probably known more for football, but they've been pretty steady recently. They were both in the Pac-12 and now the Big 12. They've been to the NCAA tournament every other year, pretty much, like 6 of the last 12 years. They've been played postseason almost the remainder of those years in the NIT, the CBI. Last year, they almost made the Sweet 16, and they had been really pretty terrible in the Big 12 for forever before then, during the 70s, 80s, through the aughts, and barely made the playoffs. So just once in 69 and 2012. So far, they're off to 4-0 start. They haven't played great teams. They've been played, I think, all borderline top 150 or below in KenPom. The best win was a double overtime victory over Northern Colorado. And their main issue on offense is that they can't hang onto the ball. They're sort of like a Michigan State used to be in the past, but much, much worse. Lots of turnovers. And they sit at 340th in turnover percentage. Actually, I don't think Michigan State ever was that bad.
No.
So out of 357 teams, they're 340th. So very, very bad. And so otherwise, it'd be pretty good because they shoot well, about 40% from 3 when they get a shot off. Same thing from 2, they're 56%, putting them at 82nd in the nation. They also almost 80% at the line. They do get the line quite a bit. So they're number 55 in free throw rate. Offensive rebounding, they're very good, 37, a little under 37%. But despite all that, that just shows you how to drag their offense all the way down to 100. It's sort of like, Michigan State, when we look at them, they're pretty green, really good about across the board, except their 3-point shooting is so bad that it drags them down some. But even despite that, they were like 55 or something like that, I think, in offense. So in defense, Colorado doesn't generate many takeaways. They're 139th. They're very good against 2s at 41st, but only 120th against 3s. Good defensive rebounding team at 73rd. They don't foul a ton, and they're just inside the top 75 in both block and steal percentage. So, and a medium pace team. They're not that fast, but they have their length of possessions about 106. They have a lot of size as well, and under Coach Boyle, they're pretty good. And it's definitely a clear step up, aside from Kansas, from Michigan State's facing competition. But it's a team that hasn't been tested either at all this season. So this will be their first real test. And I know, looking at their schedule, they don't have a whole lot of, outside of this tournament, they don't really have any other teams they're playing that are tough before they start conference play. So this is kind of their only opportunity to get some quality wins outside the conference.
Yeah. So a lot to talk about
A
here.
lot to unpack there.
I think first we should talk about Maui. And I've touched on this at least a couple of other times, but it's worth mentioning again. Really, and no matter what Michigan State does in this thing, enjoy this year's Maui, because the direction the sport is going in, it seems pretty obvious to me that these kind of events are starting to slip by the wayside, which is kind of hard to believe, and it's happening very fast, and that's occurring primarily in exchange with hosted multi-team events. So we're going back to the future. We're going back to the way it was in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, when most major schools would have their own tournament, their own holiday time tournament frequently. And going away from these multi-team. I mean, it's hard to imagine, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but I can remember for years and years and years, the only tournaments like this that were out there, the Great Alaskan Shootout was the big one
Yep.
of the two big ones. There was an event in Hawaii that's not Maui. It was the Rainbow Classic. It was hosted by the University of Hawaii. And that was kind of it. There would be Oregon State used to host one, the Far West Classic. There was an 8-team event that was pretty good, but by and large, you didn't see these things. So sometimes you'd see Michigan State. I can remember, they always had their own tournament, or for many years they had their own tournament. But I can remember one year in the early 80s, they played in a tournament that St. John's had. Think they may have played in one at Syracuse at one point. But anyway, this is changing, and you look at the field in this tournament, and it is incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
by the rankings, this is about as good as you're ever going to see. I mean, it's just there's no soft touch when Colorado is and by the way, the rankings you used, we should tell people are KenPom rankings.
Ken Palm, yes, I should
They're not
clear.
AP
Yes.
rankings,
Which
but
are more worthless. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, but um, it's really, really something to see this loaded a field where the worst team is a high major team. That's
Yeah.
now they're picked. Colorado is picked to finish fairly low in the Big 12. In fact, I believe they're picked last, mostly because of the roster attrition. They had
Yeah.
a very good team actually. They had 3 guys drafted, 2 in the first round from last year's team, and then they also lost 3 other guys to the portal. So heavy roster turnover from a very good team stands to reason they would be picked low. But the flip side of that is their team is so new in most respects that we really don't have a firm
Yeah.
grip yet on what they're actually going to be. So they may surprise to the upside. So that's Maui. Just no matter what happens to Michigan State, they're going to play 3 very good games, and that's good for March.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for the improvement scope from this team, slope, I should say, that you hope that no matter what the results are, that you're gaining something from playing highly competitive games against very good opponents. I mean, truthfully, if you said that, half of the Final Four came out of this field, wouldn't be a surprise
No.
when you look at the caliber of teams, you know. So wouldn't surprise me if you had. I guess I got to think it through. So we got Auburn, we've got UNC, we got UConn. It wouldn't surprise me if you had as many as like 3 conference champions
Sure.
coming out of this league,
Yeah.
Um,
Iowa State
it's
certainly has a chance too.
sure. Well, Auburn in the SEC, Carolina in the
ACC,
ACC, you wouldn't rule out.
UConn,
UConn in the Big
yeah.
East is the favorite.
Yeah.
As you say, Iowa State in the Big 12, not the favorite, but right there. And then you look at longer shots like, Dayton in the A10 might well be
Yeah.
a favorite in that league. Michigan State certainly not the favorite in the Big 10, but a team that if things break the right way, you could see contending in a
Yep.
wide open Big 10. So it's a really interesting field. So enjoy it, because I don't know how many more of these we're going to have. I've already seen what the Maui field looks like next year, and it's not this.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be going by the boards. Anyway, specific to Colorado then, Tad Boyle, who you mentioned in passing, is the head coach there. And he's in, I believe this is his 13th season.
Yeah.
But he has really done quietly a pretty damn good job. And I think the reason that it's quiet is that he's never had that great breakthrough season. He's never had that, deep second weekend run in the tournament. He's never really even come close to winning his league. But he's made the NCAA tournament half the time. And then all but one of the other years, he was either in the NIT or the CBI. So that means he hasn't had any of those, seasons like we saw Michigan have last year.
Right. Yeah.
He hasn't had any of those. He's been remarkably consistent in putting a winning product on the court. And that's even more impressive when you look, and I actually had to refresh my memory on this. When you look at the historic profile of Colorado's program, now it's really interesting. Colorado's made the NCAA tournament 33 times in the history of the program. That's really impressive. That's not actually that many behind Michigan State. I'd have to think about it. It might not actually be behind Michigan State. It's close. It probably is by a few, but it's close.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The vast majority of those came in the 60s and earlier, including a period when the NCAA tournament wasn't even the big tournament. It was the NIT in the 30s and 40s, for example. But still, tremendous success in those periods. But once you get past 1969, from 1970 up until the 2012 season, they made the NCAA tournament 3 times total. One of those seasons, maybe 2, were when Chauncey Billups was there.
He was pretty good.
Yeah, and then that's about it. They weren't putting guys into the NCAA or into the NBA. They weren't making the NCAA tournament. It was a moribund program. There's no other way to put it. So that's why I had to refresh my memory, because honestly, for my entire lifetime of paying attention to college basketball, basically up until Tad Boyle took over, Colorado was a total non-entity.
Yeah, right. They're like a Nebraska, I always felt.
Absolutely.
Like, very Big 12, good, right?
Very good comparison point. Like a Nebraska with far less consistent football success. Yeah. And then Tad Boyle gets there, and he's in the tournament half the time at a school like that. And keep in mind, Colorado, not a huge talent producing state. So it matters less now that we're in the portal era and all of that. But he does not have the advantage of being in a talent rich area that, hey, as long as he keeps most of those guys at home, Denver doesn't produce a lot in the way of high major basketball talent. Some, but not as much as a lot of other cities of comparable size. So it really is, I think, you're not going to go overboard, but it's pretty impressive,
right,
the job he's done. And I think if he can make this team competitive, he can get this team to the tournament with all the roster turnover, that would be a really, really nice coaching job. And I wouldn't put it past him. The problem is they've played terrible competition. Yeah. The only team they've played that had really a pulse was Northern Colorado, and they had to go double overtime to beat them. Northern Colorado is in the 150s in Ken Palm. So about 20 spots worse than Samford was, to put it into perspective. Samford's in the 130s. Everything else they've played is 250 or below. So they haven't been tested. So when you go through these numbers that they've put up so far, you have to keep that in mind, that it really can only be taken so far, because they just haven't been pushed by anything close to the caliber of competition they're going to see over these 3 days, or what they're going to see in their league. That said, as you mentioned, offensively, everything has been very good except for turnovers. But the turnovers have been so bad that it is taking an offense that, using everything else, should be top 30, and it's got them sitting at, I think, 93. That's how bad the turnover problems have been. I mean, they have just and it honestly, when you look at their roster, you begin to understand it because they don't have many actual true guards on this team. When you look at the guys that are in the rotation and then the guys who are playing major minutes, especially, they're big, but they don't have really proven guards, actual guards. So it's not shocking that they're having an issue in this area, but it's a big problem. As you say, the comparison of Michigan State with horrific 3-point shooting, it's less of a problem than the turnover problem is because even with that, Michigan State is still, I think, in the low to mid 60s on
Right.
offense. So about 30 spots better than Colorado.
And it goes without saying, even if you get a shot and miss it, you're at least having an opportunity to offensively rebound it.
Some of those possessions have still turned into points. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
When you're turning the ball over, you don't get the chance to score.
Right.
So it's a bigger problem. And Michigan State fans are familiar with this. This is, turnovers being an issue is not foreign to the Michigan State basketball experience over the years. But this has been extreme. And again, they've been doing it against very nondescript competition.
Tomato cans, as you'd say.
Right. What happens when they start playing real teams? We've got to see. I'm sure that's got Tad Boyle having trouble sleeping.
I'm going to stop you for a second. So, I'm
Yeah.
looking at the numbers. It looks like they're averaging almost their turnover rates. Like, is it truly like 23% of their possessions are turnovers?
Yeah. So
that's about insane.
That's about 1 out of every 4 possessions is ended in a turnover. And to make it even worse still,
like 25 a game.
The vast majority of those are coming via opponent steals.
Oh yeah.
So we talk about different kinds of turnovers, right? If it's a traveling call, you throw anything that's resulting in the opponent having to inbound the ball. Yeah, that's not good. You don't want that. But at least you're not giving up an easy chance to score as a result. No, they are getting the ball taken from them frequently. That is a problem. That could be a big problem in this game, which we'll come back to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a real issue. Now you look at the other end, I like the fact that they're really solid against twos and they're rebounding well defensively. That's stuff that should hold up, to be honest. If you can do those two things consistently, yeah, you'll have the odd night where maybe a team gets hot from 3 and you struggle. But if you do those two things reasonably well, you're going to likely be fairly consistent defensively. So I like their chances of being a competitive team defensively. But man, at the other end, if they can't value the ball, it's a problem. It offsets everything else they do well.
So, do you think like they're ranked like on Torvik, it looks like 69th defensively for adjusted efficiency.
Yeah.
And do you think that's somewhat a reflection of the playing? Because just to give you an example, Iowa right now, and I've watched them play. Trust me, their defense is nothing special. They're ranked 77th, which I can't imagine. That's what they're going to maintain.
Absolutely. The idea is that adjusted defensive efficiency is supposed to take into account the caliber of opponent you're playing as well. So it's not just raw stats.
Right.
But
yeah,
early in the season, it's difficult for me to have a lot of faith in that being dialed in. I think Ken Palm generally gets there once it's got enough data to work.
Right. With. Now your data set's short. It's small. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But it is a valid point. And it's what I was trying to say earlier. They haven't played anybody.
Right.
Michigan State, say what you want. Michigan State has played the supposed #1 team in the nation. And then they played a team in Samford who, while I'm not going to build them up into being, a Final Four group, that team is the favorite in its league. And for a team at their level to be ranked in the 130s in Ken Palm, that says something.
Yeah, they're a 14 seed last year, right? I mean,
That's
they're
right.
slouch. Yeah.
So Michigan State, I think, has been, and I'd also say, and I can't compare them, against the teams that Colorado has seen because I've watched those teams yet, but I have a feeling that Bowling Green probably ends up better than some of those teams that Colorado has played as well. Now, the first two opponents, okay, Monmouth and Niagara, yeah, that's
Right.
probably comparable to what Colorado has seen. But Michigan State's played several games already, multiple games, where they really got a legit test. Colorado hasn't had to do that yet.
Yeah.
And, so it's going to be, and Colorado, I don't believe, has played away from home yet.
Nope.
MSU
They have
has
4 home games. Yeah.
MSU has played a neutral site game. So they're one up on the Buffs in that area, in terms of being comfortable in an environment other than at home. So we'll see. I mean, Colorado, these numbers that we're seeing and their level of performance, that may all be legitimate. I don't think we can put a whole lot of faith in it yet, just because they haven't really played high caliber opposition, and that's the kind of thing that does take a while to work itself out in
Yeah.
the metric systems, in my opinion.
Well, do you want to talk about the starters, or do you have anything else to add about
No,
the team?
I think that's the general picture.
Okay. So we'll go to talk about the team for Colorado, brought to you by the brothers Just Two Gutters. As you probably know, if you listen regularly, I was hanging out with the brothers at the game the Samford game, and they would like to offer a drawing for a free gutter cleaning up to $300 value. So that's for like an average size house. I don't know, whatever that means. It means they started talking about linear feet. I have to admit, my eyes glazed over a little bit. I'm not, they were talking during the second half about buying bulk aluminum and stuff. And so I just like, all right, whatever. Again. So anyway, so if you want an opportunity because you don't want to get on the ladder and you don't want to clean out those gutters, please send just a quick email to me. Very simple. Your name, the subject line to just read gutters, and you'll be entered automatically in the drawing. We'll probably do that probably Thanksgiving or something. I don't know. I'll see if I can do it on Twitter or something like that so you can watch it. And because we want to try and get it out and get the drawing done before, whether it's, you still want your gutters cleared out before it gets too wintry. Although they'll go out there even in the crazy winter, which is, I think they're crazy for doing that. They're even talking about the dinner, like how much rainy does it have to be for you to not go and actually, actually get up on the ladder? It's like pouring rain or just kind of rain. So anyway, those guys are a little bit crazy, but that's good because they're the professionals that take care of all the gutter work that you might need, whether it's just cleaning them out, replacing them, repairing them, putting leaf guards on. So you don't have to have people come and clear them out. Whatever you need done, the gutters, the brothers that just do gutters do fantastic work. You can get them, a hold of them on either the east or the west side of the state. Go to our support page at the Final Four on the schedule.com/support. You can contact them, mention Final Four, you get 10% off your estimate. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. And they sponsor a player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. So we'll start with Julian Hammond. He's a 6'2 senior, fourth-year player for Colorado, which is unusual nowadays, right? The people are with programs that long. Averaging 9.5 points a game on 41, 36, and 82. 3.5 assists per game, but 2.25 turnovers a game. So I guess the numbers we're talking about, that's actually pretty good.
Oh, he's their top playmaker. I mean, it's a rough deal in that respect. It really
Yeah.
is. Um, this is the thing. We talk about Colorado losing a ton of guys from last year and a lot of roster turnover, and that's all true. But they also do return several guys who have been with the program for a little while, but are stepping up into bigger roles. And Hammond would be the primary guy there. They need him to be a steadying presence. He's a fourth year guy. He's played a lot of basketball for them in a role, and now he's more of a featured guy. But yeah, it's I would hope that what we're going to see from Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman, maybe Jace Richardson, as guys who are likely to guard him, is some good ball pressure.
Yeah.
Because I would like nothing gambling. That's not MSU style, but I'd like to put this guy under a little bit of heat and see how he responds. And he's their best.
moving on then. And this is where you'll notice this theme here as I start going through the size of these players. So that was 6'2". The next player is Trevor Baskin, 6'9", 205-pound senior, transferred in from D2 Colorado Mesa. He was an All-American last year. This year's averaging 10 points a game, 7 rebounds a game, shooting 62, 25, and 65, and leads the team in turnovers with 10. Also gets fouled a lot, so he averages almost 5 free throws a game.
Yeah, and Tad Boyle with a couple of non D1 transfer starters.
Starters, yeah.
Yeah, including Baskin. And it just goes to show you something that we've been
Yep.
talking about with, I think, ever increasing frequency this year is this phenomenon of guys from D2, or in this case, they've also got another player we'll talk about in a minute who came in from the NA, even outside the NCAA system, the NAIA system, which is generally smaller still in terms of the schools. It's a new ball game, and these guys are contributing in a major way for Colorado. So Baskin very clearly a guy who is an important player for them. He struggled a bit with the three, but everything else he's done well. And honestly, assigning guard or forward designations these next few guys is really meaningless because I would say
Yeah.
none of them are guards, but I got to
Yeah.
list somebody there. Um, he's kind of a. It seems his profile is that of an aggressive player because he's averaging 5 free throw attempts a game, which is pretty good. Tied for the team lead. And, Colorado, like Michigan State, has done a good job at getting itself to the line thus far. And Baskin has definitely been part of that. But he's also turning the ball over. So,
yeah, suggests he's heading inside and getting stripped sometimes, and then other times he's
yeah,
drawing the foul, right? Kind of one of the
yeah,
two. Yeah.
yeah.
So next would be Hassan Diop, 6'8", 210-pound sophomore. He's also a returning player, averaging only 1.5 points a game, but almost 7 rebounds a game on 25, 50, and 50 shooting, but very limited volume in those, obviously, since he's only averaging 1.5 points a game. He does play a lot. He plays almost half the game at 20 minutes. So
Yeah. And he started the last two. Uh, Obviously the definition of a non-scorer, right? His impact has been almost exclusively as a rebounder and defensive player. But again, he's another one of these guys that he's in his second year in the program, but stepping up into a much bigger role than he occupied a year ago.
then we have Andre Jakimovsky, 6'8", 220-pound COVID year transfer from Washington State. So kind of Pac-12 to, well, at this point, it's kind of hard to say what these transfers are, but it's from certainly Power 5 conference. He's number one option scoring wise for Colorado, averaging 14.3 points a game, 5.3 rebounds a game, shooting 41, 36, and 81.
Yeah, and the 3-point scoring is a big part of his game. He played 4 years at Washington State. He's ninth on the school's all-time list for threes made in a career. And he's living up to that so far at Colorado. He's, as you said, he's shooting 36% from deep. He's getting up 5.5 3-point attempts per game.
Yeah.
So that's a big part. You look at his physical attributes, 6'8", 220, and you might think, okay, that's more of a power forward type, but really, as much as anything, he's a perimeter player offensively. It's not to say he can't score inside, but 3-point shooting is a big part of what he does. And he stepped into a big role. He was not a double-digit scorer at Washington State. He was just below 10 points a game. So he stepped up. He's so far, at least, he's over 14 a game, leading them in scoring. He's making that move that you would hope for as a fifth-year guy. We saw at Michigan State with Joey Hauser in his fifth year.
Yeah.
Tyson Walker in his fifth year. Those guys really took on more of a scorer's role and that mentality as they were, and to be leaders and focal points. And it seems like that's happening for Jakimovsky.
And finally, for projected starters, we have Elijah Malone, 6'10", 270-pound COVID year transfer from Grace College, as you mentioned before, NAIA All-American, averaging 14 points a game, 5.8 rebounds a game, leads the team in blocks with 7 through 4 games, shooting 66, and he's 1 for 3 from three and 85% from the line in the season.
Yeah, that 85% from the line is a big deal because he's tied for the team lead in free throw attempts thus far. He's averaging 5 a game.
5 a game. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So if you've got a big man, and he's big, 6'10", 270, who draws that much contact and is getting to the line that much, and he's able to be that reliable, if he can keep up anything close to that, if he's an 80% shooter on the year at that position with that kind of profile, that's a huge bonus for this team.
For sure.
But again, you look at the this is a guy coming from the NAIA route, or level rather, and he steps up to D1 and he's 14-6 basically.
Yeah.
That's, this is something that it really is mind-blowing when you see how many guys are doing this that Michigan State has already seen. Forget, how many others around the country are doing it that we're not locked into, but just MSU has seen several of these guys that are not just coming onto these teams and playing some minutes, but are the focal points. We saw it with Bowling Green.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. And, I got to say this, I would imagine a 6'10", 270 guy at the NAIA level is not a common sight. So it's not surprising that he would have been an All-American there, but for him to be, putting up 14-6, granted, legit. He hasn't seen great opposition yet. And I think Michigan State will provide, he's going to be dealing with physical peers out there. So that'll be another level in terms of a test for him. But man, so far, you got to be really impressed with what he's done in stepping up in weight class.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive, and you're starting to see, like you said, you're seeing these players more and more, and I mean, we've, in some ways, you kind of saw this in pro football. You'll see these players who, didn't play any major schools, but now you're definitely seeing it in college basketball. People kind of cast a wider net. But I also imagine it had this. Let's just envision the scenario where this Elijah Malone comes to the Spartans as a transfer. How up in arms they were all focused on, fire stars and where is he coming from, and you just don't know sometimes what the production's going to be.
It depends. Oh yeah, all this stuff is a crapshoot.
Yeah,
I mean, you can guess and you can assume. I think that's part of the motivation behind utilization of the transfer portal. Is I would guess that many coaches would tell you, well, it's preferable to go into the high school ranks because there's more predictability, because we've already seen this guy play collegiately, right?
Yeah, but I think mature too physically.
The physical maturity thing is real in many cases, but beyond that, I don't think it's very predictable. I think you see, and ever more so as we go, you see that, sometimes guys from a smaller level step up in class and they're as good or better than they were there. And other times it doesn't translate.
Yeah.
And sometimes, look, supposedly, I don't know if I believe it, but supposedly Kansas State is paying Coleman Hawkins something like $2 million to play there this year. His numbers are awful to start the year. He's not averaging double digits in scoring. He's not really rebounding very well. Everything is way down from what it was at Illinois.
Yeah.
So you tell me, are any of these things was that predictable? If it was, I don't think you pay him $2 million. You might not pay him $200,000. So, that's kind of the deal. But one more thought on this, and then we can turn to the rest of their roster. I can remember years ago, there would be there's a guy that I'm sure some of our listeners are aware of named Steve Bell, who has been for forever, has been one of the best resources in terms of covering and evaluating high school basketball and AAU basketball in Michigan. And not in a covering recruiting wars sense, but just players. Like who's a good player, anyway. I remember him talking about guys who had played in the past and not a lot, but a guy or two over the years, and I can't even remember the names off the top of my head, who played at Hope or Calvin.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And saying this guy would have been a very, very good Big Ten player. And this is long ago enough. I remember, and I respect Steve's basketball acumen immensely, but I remember being skeptical of that, hearing it, saying, well, yeah, that's not. But I'll tell you, you look at what's been happening, and it's almost a certainty to me that he was right. If a guy was like a three-time Division III All-American, he probably could have at least been a solid contributor and maybe more than that at the Big Ten level if he'd been
Right.
given a chance. And so the portal, one of those positive things, we've touched on this before, one of the positive ends of it is it has made it easier for guys like that to get a chance because they can be eligible instantly without having to sit out a year. It's worth
Right.
it to high major coaches or just D1 coaches, period. It's worth it to them to take the risk on a guy and say, well, if it breaks right, I've got a contributor and somebody who helps this year. If it doesn't, no big deal. I only had him for 1 year anyway, you
Yeah.
know. But you don't have to invest that. Well, he's occupying a scholarship slot, but he can't play for me this year. He's got to sit out the way it used to be. And I
Right.
think
Right.
I think because of that, the reins have been loosened, and you're seeing so many more of these guys getting their chance. And man, the results speak for themselves. I mean, we've just talked about two guys in the starting lineup who were not at the D1 level last year, who were each averaging double digits in points
Yeah.
for a high major team. You
Yeah.
know, that says a lot.
Right. Uh, so what would you say as far as the starters there? Because I imagine to be the starting core here. Who would be the player Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter?
Oh, I'm going to go with Jakimovsky, which
Hmm.
is an easy call. I mean, he's their leading scorer, but given that he's a big perimeter threat,
Yeah.
and a fifth year guy who's played at the high major level, he's my choice. But truthfully, it could be they're all packed in. Well, four of them are packed in between like 9.5 and
Yeah.
14
Right.
points a night. So there's not a huge gap there, but I'm going to go with him.
Yeah. And per my wife's request, I need to give players number. So he's number 23 for those
Okay.
who keep watching at home. It makes it easier. Moving on to reserves, then we have Javon Ruffin, 6'5" junior guard. Started three of the games this year, is averaging 25 minutes. He's averaging 11 and a half points a game on 57, 33, and 83 shooting. So he's also a guy who's a threat off the bench.
Yeah, and he's playing a lot. And he's another one of these guys that has been in the program, but is really moving up in terms of his slot in the rotation. He played very limited minutes last year. In fact, I'd say he was only marginally in the playing rotation. And now, 25 minutes a night. And on top of all that, he's actually at least a semblance of a guard. So they really
Right.
do need him. Now, it wouldn't shock me to see him start this game because I could see
Yeah. Michigan
where
State's.
I can see
Yeah.
where where Tad Boyle could look at what Michigan State has
Right.
in its backcourt and say, I can't expose my guys to this.
Right.
I gotta go a little more conventional in terms of who I'm playing, a good amount of minutes with. And I could see that. And if he did decide to do that, the natural thing would be for Ruffin to be the guy to get the nod because he's already playing starters minutes essentially. But yeah, solid start. So far you have to feel pretty good about him stepping up into a bigger role. But again, the level of competition is now stepping up
Right.
considerably.
Yeah. We'll see. All right. Then we have Sebastian Rancic, 6'9", 210-pound freshman forward, averaging 7.3 points a game, 2.3 rebounds a game in about 16 minutes, shooting 63, 67, and 75. And was just ranked just outside the top 100 nationally. So I guess not too surprised that he's being a little productive.
Yeah, it's interesting how this stuff goes. So they had one kid by the name of Crawford, I believe, who was solidly a top 100 recruit, and he's redshirting, even though he's like a wing, which they could probably use.
Yeah.
He's redshirting, whereas two other guys, Rancic being one of them, were ranked lower but are in the rotation. It just goes to show you sometimes you never can tell for sure. Um, you got to really like his profile if you're Boyle, a guy 6'9", who's hitting 2/3 of his threes. Now, I would assume that's going to come down as time goes on, but he's obviously proving that shooting is not an issue.
Yeah.
And to have a guy with that kind of length, if they can get him a little stronger, get him bulked up a little bit, you could really have something as an inside outside player offensively. But, in the meantime, 16 minutes a game, we're going to see him on the court a fair amount. I mean, he's firmly in their rotation right away as a freshman, which when you've lost as many guys as they lost, boy, that's a welcome sight to have a newcomer to your program be able to step right in. I mean, Michigan State sees that with Jace Richardson, right? Same
Yeah.
kind of deal here.
I think Michigan State would be so thrilled to have anyone shooting 6 for 9 from three for the season.
Yeah.
So RJ Smith, 6'3" sophomore guard. He was hurt after a few games last year. He's now averaging 7 points a game on 56, 55, and 50 shooting.
Yeah, good start for him. Bouncing back after losing most of a year. I think he played like 7 or 8 games before he got hurt. Losing most of a year to injury and off to a really good start shooting. And again, he's another guy that if they decide, boy, we need to lean a little more on our actual guards. You could see him maybe play a little bit more than he has been generally to date.
And then I was going to say a little more size, but I think I might just say a little more length with
Yeah.
Bang at Doc. 6'11", 185 sophomore. Started 2
Yeah.
games this year. After playing just sparingly last year, he's averaging 4 points a game, 3.8 rebounds a game in about 15 minutes, shooting 35% from the floor and 40% from three, but no free throw attempts.
Yeah. 6'11", 185. I mean,
That's
I
hard to
remember
believe it's physically possible.
I'm drawing a blank on the kid's name from Monmouth, who is actually having a really good year, and he was good against Michigan State.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
6'7", 165.
Yeah.
This is a whole other level. I mean, 6'11", 185 is that's beyond Marcus Bingham territory.
Oh yeah. It has to be. Bingham
So
wasn't he at least like 195 or
it
200?
was like 200, I think, when he
Yeah.
came to MSU. So yeah, it's something. But obviously the
Just
fact that
bones.
he's shooting 40% from three, that's not on super high volume, but still it demonstrates that uh, this kid may actually be a legitimate perimeter threat. Um, I think he was a guy that as a freshman, he was on the team, but he really didn't play a lot last year. Um, he's in their rotation, not as a huge minutes guy, but I suspect we'll see him, and they'll hope that they can get a little bit of production out of him as the night goes along, because they're gonna probably need some backup help. As I can't imagine that Elijah Malone is going to be able to go,
Yeah.
35, 36 minutes at his size and against Michigan State. And that's even if foul trouble doesn't enter the picture. So I would think we'll see some of Dak, and it'll be interesting to find out what kind of contribution he can make against guys the size of the ones Michigan State will roll out there against him.
Yeah. Colorado's going to go from a mile elevation to 5 feet elevation
Yeah.
here. So we'll see
Yeah.
at least you're moving around. Final player to mention is Felix Casares, 6'5" freshman guard, averaging 2 points a game, 2.3 rebounds a game in about 13 minutes, shooting 38, 0, and 100. And so he's other guard reserve if they should need him.
Yeah, again, interesting sometimes the roster decisions that get made. So as I mentioned, they had a guy who was, I think, somewhere in the 80s in the recruiting rankings who's redshirting, and Casares, who was just inside the top 200, is actually playing this year.
Yeah.
And the redshirt decision, as I understand it, was not due to injury concerns or anything like that. It was just he wants the year to develop. Um, and so they obviously felt like Casares was a bit more ready to play. Now I don't know how it's going to go as it unfolds, but I know this: there's definitely a role available for somebody who can actually give them, some kind of ball handling and perimeter shooting presence. I don't know if he's up to that, but there's an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, that's all you can ask for. Oftentimes, the player, that's nice
Mhm.
that they do have the chances here. All right, so that moves us on to who will clean the glass the best. Brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, are you not remembering what color your house is? Is it kind of a drab gray or brown and you thought it was a different color? Maybe it just needs to be power washed. Contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can come out and power wash your house so you don't have to. They'll get on the ladders, they'll get up close to the house. So they're not shooting from a mile away at like super high pressures. They're not going to peel off all the paint, but they'll get that clean and it's sort of like saving you a couple years on the life of your house and your paint. So contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can take care of that. 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. Obviously, they can always take care of your windows, both the inside, the outside, screens, whatever it might, whatever you need done. They have great pricing and the super friendliest people. They did a great job in my house, and I'd highly recommend them for any work. They can do any job, not just your house, maybe your business, maybe you've hooked up apartments you own, or whatever it might be. They can take care of it. So contact them today. You'll be glad you did. Right now, you're up 2-1 as far as which Michigan State player cleans the glass at best. I have no idea at this point, but I mean, Jackson has been up there every time. So I just think I'd be foolish not to say Kohler at this point. He just seems to have a knack right now for getting boards. No offensive last time, but he still had 6 defensive boards. So I think until he proves to be the wrong pick, I'm just going to go with Jackson for right now.
Okay. I'm going to make a gut choice here. I'm going to go with Carson Cooper rather than Zapala. But I don't look at this as a game that I would necessarily expect big perimeter rebounding numbers as we've seen a couple times to kind of sneak in there on us.
Yeah, right.
I think it's going to be a big man effort, but I'm going to go with Carson.
Yeah, the size, and I guess we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the size of Colorado is going to be really interesting from a rebounding standpoint for Michigan State,
and they've rebounded well. I mean,
yeah, no, I know they
both ends. And both teams they're similar. Michigan State's a little better offensively. Colorado's a little better defensively, but neither team has had a weakness to date in that regard. So, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting part of this game to see if either one can carve out an advantage. And I think Michigan State obviously has more big players, like 5-sized guys, than Colorado. But Colorado, as we've talked about, has a ton of positional size.
Yeah, six forwards.
A lot of 6'8", 6'9" guys out there at the same time. So how all that interrelates will be interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about our 5 keys of the game for Michigan State, brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing is where we get all our prizes for our contests, both the Beat Rod contest when we have our Final Four bracket challenge. Nudge Printing is who we turn to because they frankly just have the best stuff. I mean, they've been the longest sponsor of the show, and they just have great products. I mean, I mention it every time, but we have all kinds of things in our family. They are soft, breathable. It is coming close to the holidays. I'm probably going to pick up some stuff for my son now that he's down in Purdue country. He needs a little bit of green down there. My daughter also going to Michigan State. I'll get her something too, I'm sure. And she loves all the stuff. She has a jacket that I got her. She has a hoodie. She likes things that are really soft and that they're very soft, very breathable. Just great. And they just handle the washes a lot. So they're just great products, screen printed material too. So it doesn't fade very much with washing. So again, Nudge Printing is a great place to go. You can go to nudgeprinting.com, massive selection. I'll let you just go and just peruse the site. There's just a ton of things there. You get 20% off if you type in Final Four, just as one word, as a listener to the show on checkout. All right. So the first key of the game, well, this is one we haven't had before, threes. So this is a Michigan State. I mean, obviously is no longer the worst team in the country, but now I think the bottom 8 in the country, 3-point shooting at a little over 22%. And everything else in offense is clicking, but that one thing, I mean, it's a big thing, but so boy, if they could just kind of get that going, and maybe it helps get away from Breslin Center. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, didn't help them.
Didn't help in the Champions Classic, right? But, with the weird basketball. We'll put
look,
that, right?
new verse, same as the first, right? And the second and the third and the fourth. It's they haven't had, when your best shooting game is 6 for 18. That's that says it all. Here's where I'm at. I believe Michigan State can be a good team and maybe even a very good team without being great from 3. Meaning,
what do you define as great?
Top 50.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
They don't have
like
to
37%
be what they've been the last. Yeah, they don't. they can be a very good team shooting, 34% from three,
Okay.
maybe even 33 if they're good enough at enough other things. But they can't be that with the kind of production we've seen so far. That's obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually, and eventually starts on Monday when you're playing exclusively, high
Yeah.
major or might as well be high major opponents. Um, you're just not going to get away with that. I mean,
Hmm.
you might get away with it for one day, but you're not going to get away with it for three.
Yeah.
And so that's the bottom line. They do have to, as much as I can sit here and say that I think they've got much better in them, and I think that they will shoot the ball better, and that they don't have to be 40% from three to be very good. I could say all of those things, and they're all true, but they can't keep doing what they've been doing.
Right.
That's also true.
Yeah. I mean, Izzo after the practice today, I mean, apparently they were knocking him down from all over. Everybody was hitting him. Everyone's shooting great. So it's a
I
matter of,
I
it's a confidence
I have
thing during the game, right?
Yeah, I have no difficulty believing that
Yeah. No, I
because
believe it too.
we've seen enough of these players as individuals, and we've even seen these guys when they were playing in Spain or even the exhibition games, there were no problems.
Yeah.
There's nothing that was leaping out as a wow, that was really an awful display. Not at all. So they've just got to get it's similar to what it was last year. Anybody who had any understanding of who those guys actually were knew this is just one of those things. They'll get past this, but they have to actually get past it, you
Yep.
know?
Well, and I would add too that the one thing about the shooting woes right now, again, like you said, they've all for the most part we've seen them do it, so we know they can shoot. The one thing we like, if you are having trouble rebounding, for instance, at this point of the season, I think it's a lot harder thing to fix and correct and sort of be something different than someone who's just not
Absolutely.
hitting shots, right? And so, in that sense, you can be much more hopeful that the offense is get a lot better because it's something that is correctable, or at least you can shoot your way out of it. Whereas rebounding or maybe defense is in some ways is kind of set a little bit. You can certainly improve, but I
The
think it's harder to have
this is
variation.
this is not to downplay what shooting is because anybody who's ever done it understands it's to be a good shooter is the function of a lot of things that take a lot of work. It's a lot of repetition. It's skill, certainly. It's maintaining mechanics and developing consistency with them over time. All those things matter, but there is a luck element to
Yeah,
shooting. You can have perfect mechanics on a shot, great release. The shot window can be wide open. You can do everything seemingly right and still miss it. Happens all the time.
sure.
And so I say that to say I agree with you that some of the other problems you can have, and some of the other problems Michigan State as a team has had in recent years, are things that I think prove to be much more difficult to fix
Yeah,
because they're either about a mentality or they're about physical tools or lack thereof. They're about a mindset. I find those things are very difficult to alter. Whereas shooting, yeah, it's confidence, but it's if you've got guys that are good shooters mechanically, have track records underneath them of success, it's like most other things, over time, it's going to even out and you're going to get the results that you need. Let's put it this way. Anybody who's claiming that they saw this coming and that this is what should have been expected is either delusional or lying because
yeah.
there wasn't any reason to believe that. There's just not any sane reason.
No, except it happened last year is the only thing you say.
That's
Well,
not, well,
but that's not,
I said sane, right? So, yeah.
yeah, right. All right. Second key to the game is pace of the game. Michigan State tends to play faster. And certainly this year they've had a much better fast break. Colorado does not play slow, but they don't play fast. They obviously, as you mentioned, they turn over lots of live ball turnovers, so that will give you the opportunity to play a little faster as well. So we'll kind of see
Yeah.
how Michigan State, I think generally there's been no outliers so far this season, is playing faster in every aspect of the game.
No question. And you've seen it consistently, which is a really good sign. Now, again, you're stepping up in weight class in this tournament, and you start with this one. That's a different level of test. They got to do it against better opponents. But Colorado is not a program that Tom Izzo, I think he faced them. I want to say MSU faced them pre-Tad Boyle in Izzo's tenure once, if I'm remembering correctly. But I don't think they've played them since Tad Boyle's been the head coach. I'm pretty sure that's right. And so Colorado's not used to seeing Michigan State.
Yeah.
And that can be a problem for teams in these games, for opponents of Michigan State, when Michigan State has a team, as they usually do, that looks to run. I do think that there is a decent possibility that MSU is going to be able to get loose. One reason is what you mentioned, which we'll return to in a second. Live ball turnovers. It's been a particular problem for Colorado. If it's an issue in this game, look out. But I think even beyond that, I need to see Colorado consistently keeping their floor balance intact, not getting caught off made baskets. There's certain things that this Michigan State team will test in you that if you're not really ready for it, I think could pose an issue. Now, the upside for Colorado is they've when did they play their last game? Was it Sunday? Was it
Yeah, I
last
think it's
Sunday?
Sunday or it was this weekend
So
sometime.
they
Yeah.
basically had a week to
Yeah.
prepare for this. But we've seen it in NCAA tournament games where teams have had basically a week and it hasn't mattered. I think it's really tough to simulate what MSU does. And I'm hopeful that the fact that MSU wants to play fast and has been very consistently insistent in pushing pace is going to create opportunities.
Yeah. And just for those, I was doing a quick search, and the last time Michigan State played Colorado was 2003 in the first round of the NCAA tournament, where they beat
That's
them
what I
by
thought.
like
I was going to
15.
say I thought it was a tournament game, but it
Yeah,
definitely wasn't Tad Boyle. He was many
right. He
years
wasn't
off from
there.
getting
Yeah.
the job.
I don't see that they played him before then, but I'm trying to do research in the middle of our discussion. So anyway, moving on to boards. We mentioned that this is a big team. We already talked about it. It's going to be challenging. Colorado's a good offensive rebounding team, about the same as Michigan State, about 35, 36, 37%. And so, if both teams, it'll be interesting defensively how it works out. And that may be a big difference as far as, opportunities to score and chances to separate yourself from the other team.
The only thing I can say is Michigan State has had one game against a peer opponent in Kansas,
Right.
and Colorado has not.
Yeah.
That's the only real difference, because otherwise, statistically, they're very even. But MSU has had that game where they didn't win that battle, but they essentially played Kansas even up.
Right. Yeah.
On the boards. And I don't think Kansas is necessarily a great rebounding team, but they've got real size. They're real athletes. That's not nothing. I do think this is an important area. Statistics would tell you that it should be very even. If either team carves out a real edge, that could be big.
Fourth key to the game is turnovers. Mentioned Colorado doesn't like hanging onto the ball, and especially susceptible to steals, which Michigan State has shown a propensity to get some steals with the ball pressure, both from Holloman and Fears and Richardson, even Akins. And so, this is a chance, and obviously gets a break going too. So if Michigan State gets a big edge here, I find it hard to believe that Colorado can stay in it unless Michigan State can't hit a single three or something.
Yeah, I think it's something that if you're Tom Izzo, you're looking at that as an area that absolutely should be and needs to be a decisive advantage. just based on the way Colorado has played. They've that and their lineups. I mean, again, it's you look at the guys that are playing heavy minutes, and it becomes very easy to understand why it's happening. They just don't have guards.
Yeah.
And Michigan State's not a pressure team, but
Yeah.
they'll do enough. They'll play aggressively enough that it will cause you problems if you're not solid with the ball. And on the flip side of it, again, Michigan State not quite as good as they were a year ago in limiting mistakes, but still
Right.
pretty damn good by
Hmm.
historical standards. They're still well inside the top 100
Yeah.
in
Struggled last game against Samford,
well, in the
which
first
was,
few minutes, but
yeah.
14 turnovers sounds like a lot, but in a game that was played at that pace, that even wasn't a disaster. You'd like
No.
it to be like 10 or 11, but it wasn't terrible. And the last 80% of that game was really actually very well played in that regard. It was the first 7 minutes. It was a disaster.
Yeah. And if we look back in the days of Cassius as a sophomore, freshman, probably even junior, 14 turnovers we would have been pretty pleased with.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, it's all
Absolutely. You
our
were you
perspective has
were always
changed.
yeah, you were always worried about 18, 19.
Yeah.
That was
Right.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction. But regardless, look, this is simply put, I mean, it's Michigan State needs to have a real edge here.
Yeah. Right. Because, if you're not going to get an edge in offensive boards, getting it in the turnovers, obviously get extra possessions and
It's what the
chance to score
numbers
again.
suggest should happen. The
Yeah.
numbers are telling you the rebounding battle should basically be a push, but MSU should generate a lot more turnovers.
Yeah. And then finally, free throws. Michigan State has done a great job averaging well over, I mean, how many free throws are they averaging this season? It's got to be 25
Probably
a
about
game,
26. Yeah,
26. Yeah.
26-ish. Yeah.
Colorado averages quite a few as well. They have their, I think, 61st, I see here, free throw rate. So pretty good. Um, so, that'll be the question. We know that, and both teams shoot them well. I mean, Colorado shooting 78.4%. Michigan State's, I think, what, 81.2 or
81
something
point
like that.
something. Yep.
Yeah. So two teams that hit them well. I mean, I guess you got to get down to the line. You got to make them. And so there's always, you can always have a bad night. We've seen it even with good teams like last year. Michigan State would be a good free throw shooting team generally, but they have an off night occasionally.
Here's one thing I'm going to be interested in. If Colorado goes to form to date and they're playing that bigger combination
Right.
together a lot, they have not seen anything close to Michigan State's athleticism. And
Yes.
oftentimes, two things usually get you in foul trouble. Either athletes on the other side or great size can do it. In
Mm-hmm.
Michigan State's case, it would be the athletes who would be
Yeah.
likely to
Or
create a
speed.
problem.
Yeah. Which the
Yeah,
athletes. Yeah. Right.
yeah. And so I'm going to be interested to see that statistically, again, like a lot of other areas in this game, very even in terms of the amount of times they get to the line and their conversion rates. MSU slight edges in both, but just slight. Um, but I wonder about Colorado's ability to move their feet well enough to avoid having to take more fouls than they're used to when they played lesser opponents who maybe have been unable to challenge them in
Yeah.
that same way physically.
Yep. Yeah. And Michigan State's free throw defense has been poor this year. They're giving up 77.4% on the free throw line. So,
Yeah, I think Colorado's has as well.
well, there's giving up 72.6%. So there's
Okay,
kind
so
of,
not
so
quite as bad.
their free
Yeah.
throw defense is much better.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that should wrap it up for there. Obviously we're going to come back after Monday. We'll not only be able to do the post game, but we'll also do the pregame for the following game. And we'll just kind of hang on that schedule through Turkey Day. Hopefully the Lions pull off a win on Sunday and then even Thanksgiving, keep this thing rolling on the football field too. Just a quick reminder again, if you were interested in getting enter the drawing for free gutter cleaning up to $300 from Brothers Jester Gutters, send me an email at eric@tffinots, just the subject line gutters. Just leave your name in the email subject or the body of the email, and check out Nudge Printing. Check out Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. You can find all that stuff on our support page at tffinots.com/support. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.